Because this fact rewrote the rules. I mean, think about the laws of physics that were broken by Jesus rising from the dead. Like when you die, you stay dead. Well, all of a sudden that rule is broken. Or that you can't walk through walls or buzz through tombs or get out of 100 pounds of linens and spices without outside help. Jesus broke all of those rules in that moment. You think of the rules that were broken by Jesus in that time, spiritual rules, physical rules, rules of biology and physics, they're too hard to number. But for the balance of this message, I want to talk about three of them. Three of the rules that were broken by Jesus when he rose from the dead. The first one of those rules is this one right here. Rule number one, you only live once. You only live once. And of course, if you take the first letter of each of those, you have a phrase that's been popularized in 2012. The phrase is YOLO. YOLO. Now, YOLO was originally kind of a good idea. I mean, it was people saying, look, if you've only got one life to live, then you may as well make your one life count for something good, for something meaningful. But over time, that phrase YOLO kind of became an excuse for doing reckless and stupid things. Every time somebody wanted to do something dumb, they would just put YOLO at the end of their tweet and think they're cool from doing it. I imagine maybe if Nemo, was around, if YOLO was popular when Nemo was around, Marlin would yell at him, "Don't touch the boat!" And of course Nemo would shout back, "YOLO, Dad!" And off he goes. Jack Black said about that phrase YOLO, he said this, "I'm fairly certain that YOLO is just carpe diem for stupid people." My favorite of all of these is this one. What if intelligent people created YOLO to kill off all the idiots? It's a little bit of insight in that one there. Well, the idea is you only live once. And this is inherently obvious to us, right? There's few things in life that are more certain than death. There's the phrase that, the two certain things in life are death and taxes. And I'm fairly certain some people don't pay taxes. But death is certain for sure. You can count on death happening. There is going to come a day when your heart will stop beating, when your brain waves will stop forming, when you will not be in the same kind of position that you are right now. And this brings about an awful lot of fear in many people. Back in Jesus' day, people had different ideas about death. Most people thought the idea of death is you just die and you get buried in the ground and you rot and that's the end. There were many people, particularly the Greeks and some of the Jewish people as well, who believed that there was a place of the dead called Hades, and that when you died, you would go to this place called Hades, and it was kind of a one-way ticket to a dark and shadowy existence that you never, ever escaped from. The Romans during Jesus' day were afraid of death. As a matter of fact, one of the top rules for the city of Rome is no death was allowed in there. They didn't allow dead people in there. There were no funerals allowed in there, no cemeteries in the city limits, no cremations were allowed to happen in there. In fact, just outside of Rome, they had another alternate little city called the Necropolis. And the Necropolis was a place that you were supposed to take your dead people and all of your dead events in order to take care of that so it would never come in the city of Rome. Why? They were afraid of death. They didn't want to be close to it. They didn't want to see it. They didn't want it touching them, because it was a constant reminder of their own mortality. Well, when Jesus came around and he rose from the dead, and people began believing that you too can rise from the dead, that whole proximity to death thing changed. You may have noticed that historically, oftentimes cemeteries are built right next to churches in Christian nations. Why? Because the people in the church aren't afraid of those who have died. They're not afraid that there's going to be a zombie apocalypse and they'll all rise from the dead during church services. Instead, it's the idea that they're just sleeping. There's going to come a day when there's a resurrection, and we may as well just kind of all get resurrected together. Some people insisted on even being buried in basements of churches, so in a kind of tangible way, they could participate in worship, in death and life, all together at the same time, same place. Because they weren't afraid of death. In fact, that word that we have for cemetery that we use right now is borrowed from a Greek word that means dormitory. Because there's just confidence that they're just sleeping when they're in the cemetery, and one day they too will rise from the dead. You see, this idea that you only live once, it's a false premise. It's a false premise. You don't only live once. When Jesus rose from the dead, he proved that you can live twice, once in this body and once in a resurrected body. Once for a very short period of time, like 74 years, and once for a very long period of time in a new body with new things that we can look forward to in our proximity to and relationship with God. Jesus said, I rose from the dead, and you too can now rise from the dead. You will die, but you can live. And Jesus broke the rule that you only live once. Now you can live twice.